Beyond Reason Radio.
Geez, it seems like every time I start the show, Tom Benson, there's breaking news.
Oh, really?
That I have to start the show with. There's breaking news. Well,
it's broken, huh?
Yeah, the news is definitely broken. That's a whole nother story. There is, I mean, this isn't like breaking as of this minute, but as of today, it's very important, so I want to update it.
All right.
The Minneapolis officer Chauvin, who killed George Floyd, he now faces upgraded murder charge.
I heard that.
Originally, it was third-degree murder and manslaughter. Now it's being upgraded to second-degree murder. And arrest warrants have been issued for the 3 other officers at the scene. If convicted on both counts... Actually, I'm sorry. The 3 other officers involved were being charged with 2 counts of aiding and abetting and second-degree murder. If convicted on both counts, the officers face a maximum sentence of 50 years in prison and a fine of up to $20,000. Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison affirmed that with the upgraded charges, all 4 officers face the same potential maximum sentence. I'm a little worried about this because if you overcharge, it can be harder to convict. And this guy needs to be convicted. Now,
they say that's one of the reasons why these extra charges have been, delayed for the past, 5 or 6 days, because they wanted to make sure they had a good case. Apparently,
there is a good case to make on this. But the reaction to all of this is really beyond reason. Speaking of the other officers, one of the other officers is named Tao Tao, or it's Tao Tao or Tao Tao, I think. There was an article I saw today that now is saying we need to address the problem of anti-blackness in the Asian American community. So not only is there white privilege, but there's Asian American privilege.
I know.
Really. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I am your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is...
I'm glad there's somebody to do it.
Beyond reason. Why do I have to be the guy to do it?
Because you put on the mantle of reasonability.
I try. But sometimes I'm like, why do I have to be the guy to go against the grain? Why do I have to be a guy to go against the mob? Why do I have to be a guy that goes against the narrative, the groupthink? It's exhausting. By the way, yes, this is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee, the voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason. We're on till 8 p.m. tonight, right here on News Radio WFLA Orlando till 8 p.m. Of course, you can catch the podcast on the iHeartRadio app or anywhere podcasts are available. We're on Facebook Live as well. You can like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page. You can also follow me on Twitter at Michael Yaffee. And the voice you heard in the control room just now, once again with his American flag hat, which I love, is Mr. Tom Benson. How are you, Tom?
I'm doing fine. A little dismayed by everything that's going on, like a lot of other people. I long for the days when we just had a virus to worry about.
I got to tell you, this year has been exhausting in terms of the news. I try not to let the news get to me. I just try to do the job. I try to think about it reasonably. But over the weekend, in the past couple of days, watching the news, literally watching our cities across the country burn, mobs of people beating business owners, killing people,
beating elderly women,
shooting cops. And I almost broke down a couple times. I almost can't take it because this is the greatest country in the history of mankind. We are so lucky to live in these times.
Did you catch the video of the mother slapping her 16-year-old son around because she found out he had been throwing rocks at cops?
No, I did not. But I have an interesting story. It might be the one I have later. I didn't have video of it.
Here's the footnote. She's a single mother of 6.
Oh, jeez. But, of course, we're not going to address the real problem.
Of course not.
In this country, which is the breakdown of the family.
Mm-hmm.
That's the real problem. Not systemic racism, not police brutality, not Donald Trump. One of the main real problems is the breakdown of the family and the lack of God. But yesterday, I actually had a little bit of hope, believe it or not, because before I'm watching these riots and I'm thinking, okay, this is like French Revolution stuff. This is like the end of the country stuff. Things are breaking down. I'm getting depressed for the future of my country, which, like I said again, makes no sense. We have it so good here. And blacks will tell me, no, we don't. If you are black in 2020 in the United States, you have it better than most people in the history of mankind. You just do. And yet we're burning it down. For what? For what? Well, that's what I want to go over on today's show. And you know what? The reason why I had some hope is because when I looked at like some of the protests, like in Orlando yesterday, thousands of people. And I guess they're protesting today, downtown Orlando. Thousands of people.
With a curfew set to start at 8 o'clock.
And they don't care about the curfew. They want to break the curfew. They want to block traffic. And I'm thinking most of the people I'm seeing are young white kids. They're young black kids or older adults, but the most of what I'm seeing are young white kids who probably have it much better than I ever did. And I'm thinking, why are you there? Are you really there because you actually believe in systemic racism? Because you actually believe police brutality is so bad that you have to be there? I don't think that's why they're there. I don't believe that they've ever experienced real oppression in their life to do what they're doing. This is what I think a lot of this is when it comes to these massive protests. There's a couple of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is this. An example for you. Influencers, social media influencers, are using looted stores for photo shoots. Yes, there have been videos circling around the internet of social media influencers being spotted in action posing in front of broken glass or boarded up shops. And of course, they have other people taking the picture. This happened in LA. There's one powerful moment when a chick in yoga pants and a sports bra confronted the solemn sight of a looted T-Mobile. She goes there and she's looking at it, and why? So she could get a picture of her being upset at it. And that's what I think a lot of this is. I think a lot of this, frankly, is people that want to virtue signal, that want to make themselves feel good about themselves, so they can post on Instagram or Facebook or Twitter or Snapchat or TikTok about how good of a person they are and how virtuous they are because they're protesting injustice. Even though they have no idea what the injustice actually is, other than anecdotal evidence, they have no idea what the solutions really are. They don't know the cores of the problems, but they feel good now because, well, I put a blacked out screen on my Instagram, so look how good of a person I am. Look at me taking a picture of myself at a protest. I'm so good because we're so oppressed as I get out my $1,000 iPhone and take a picture on social media. And then after we're done, I go to my nice air conditioning house where I have my 3 meals a day, my hot showers, my Peloton bike.
There you go. My video games.
My computer, my Alexa. Oh my gosh, I'm so oppressed. This country is so awful. Oh my gosh, we need to tear down this system because it's so terrible. Look how good I am now because I went to this protest. When actually you haven't done anything good. And you know what really tells me? I don't know if people actually believe what they're doing. The inside, I don't think, they tell themselves that, oh, this is fighting injustice, I'm doing the right thing.
Well, their peers probably give them feedback. They feed on that, and they want more feedback.
Yes, you're exactly right. Look at this Man Myth poll. There was a poll that came out that says, how satisfied are you with your local police department? College-educated whites, 73% very or somewhat satisfied, 9% somewhat or very dissatisfied. Non-college whites, 70% is satisfied, 14% non-satisfied. Black, 72% satisfied with their local police department. 17% not satisfied.
Pretty consistent and all pretty high.
Yeah. So even blacks say, well, my local police department is great. I don't have an issue. They're doing their jobs. But then they believe this narrative out there that they have to protest because, well, the rest of the country's bad.
It's like it's 5 o'clock somewhere, so let's have a drink. So there's oppression somewhere, so I got to speak up.
And the only reason they believe that isn't because of what they're experiencing. It's because they've bought into the narrative that is being pushed by their peers, like you said, and they want to go out and virtue signal and feel good about themselves. Instead of being an individual and thinking for yourself. This is what drives me more crazy than anything. Most of this is group think. Most of this is following the crowd. Most of this is following the mob. I am a believer in the power of the individual. And that each individual is blessed, no matter what their race is blessed with gifts by God to do great things and to be good people and to learn great things and to have a powerful voice. But you have to think as an individual. If this country could get back to believing in the power of the individual over the power of the mob, we would make so many strides in this country. But unfortunately, we don't believe in that. Instead, it's not about me. It's about people are getting their purpose based off the groups they associate with. And instead of associating with good groups like their families, their neighbors, or their churches, they are now associating with political groups online. So they feed off their stuff online, these political groups, these political TV shows. They get their meaning and purpose off of that. And then when there's one unjust act, which is horrible. I did 2 shows on the fact that George Floyd was probably murdered in some way and that cop should have been arrested. He should have been arrested sooner. But I refuse to buy into the narrative that our country is based on racism, that most cops are racist, that the system is racist. I don't see the evidence. I believe individuals can be racist. I believe there are individuals who do bad things. I believe individuals hurt each other, but I don't believe that this is a systemic problem. We live in a time where everyone would rather feel good about themselves based on their groupthink rather than standing up for individual liberty and rights. I'm going to talk more about this in a moment. We have some Beyond Reason audio to play for you, and we'll get to that. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Subscribe to the Beyond Reason podcast today on your Stitcher app and hear the voice of reason anytime. The conscience in your ear telling you the difference between right and wrong. Yaffee is back on the air.
Oh, man, we have so much more to get to. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm Michael Yaffee, joined by Tom Benson. So, if you've ever listened to this show before, you know I'm not always the biggest fan of Trump. I go back and forth. He does some good things, does some bad things.
Mm-hmm.
But I got to tell you, I'm not even the biggest fan of how Trump responded to the coronavirus. His actions were fine. It was his mouth that usually gets him in trouble. It's kind of the same with what's going on with the riots. His mouth gets him into trouble again. His actions are okay. But the reaction to Trump really is beyond reason, in my opinion. Even President Trump came out initially and denounced the killing of George Floyd and called for an FBI investigation into it. We're all united on the fact that what happened to George Floyd was wrong and atrocious and needed justice. We all agree on it. And yet there were still riots and there were still protests. People are more upset by President Trump's Twitter feed than they are about the fact that our cities were burning. Think about that for a second. So Trump decides to do a speech in the Rose Garden where he talks about being law and order. He says he's with peaceful protesters, believes what happened to George Floyd was wrong, but he wants to be the president of law and order. He must have law and order as well. He's exactly right. Of course he's right. But they cleared out protesters in Lafayette Park right next to the White House, and they say they did it so Trump could just have a photo op. Now, forget the fact that the night before, the church that Trump went to, the Episcopal Church, was almost burned to the ground. Forget the fact that Lafayette Park was a scene of violence the night before and was almost destroyed. There was vandalism all over the place. You could see it when Trump walked by it. Forget the fact that the Attorney General actually called for the clearing out of that park the night that early that morning, and it should have been done earlier. It wasn't supposed to be done at that moment. The Attorney General came and said, he told them, we need to clear out that park. Then he shows up and they hadn't done it yet, and he said, you need to clear the park. Forget the fact that, all of that. Forget the fact that there were reports of some vandalism and some violence against the cops, and that's why the cops reacted, not just the order. But the reaction to what Trump did, like I said, is beyond reason. Let's listen to Don Lemon here from CNN. And CNN, what in the world is going on? I have like 4 cuts here from CNN reacting to this. I don't know what's happened to that station. I just don't get it. How people can watch this. Here's what Don Lemon said in reaction to the fact that Trump made that so-called photo op. Here it is.
From the commander-in-chief for this very moment that just happened in front of our eyes. Why were we pretending otherwise? Open your eyes, America. Open your eyes. We are teetering on a dictatorship. This is chaos. Has the president, I'm listening, is the president declaring war on Americans? What is happening here? He's saying he wants to protect peaceful protesters at the same time, sending law enforcement and military into the streets to push peaceful protesters back, to be aggressive with peaceful protesters. He is doing the exact opposite of what he said in that speech.
So Don Lemon is more outraged about moving protesters than he is about the fact that that area was almost burnt to the ground the night before. Did you see the pictures of D.C. the night before?
It was a raging fire. It wasn't a little
and it wasn't just in that spot. There were several areas that were on fire. Our nation's capital is on fire. And he's saying, well, Trump's a dictator? What about the mob that's setting the nation's capital on fire? But what's really interesting is he talked about protesters. Interesting. Because there were peaceful protesters just a few months ago that just wanted to get back to work because they were forced to stay in their homes because of the coronavirus. And here's what Don Lemon said about those protesters.
I understand that people are hurting. Yes, a lot of people are hurting. But there are people who are frontline workers who have to get out there. I did the color of COVID this weekend. Those people are at the grocery stores who didn't expect to have their lives be placed in danger because they have to work at the grocery store. They're driving buses, and you're protesting against. You're slapping the faces of the people who are the healthcare workers who put their lives on the line every day because you want a haircut, you want to go play golf. You're concerned about. Of course, you're concerned about your business. Tell the president that. And you're out there with guns, with weapons strapped to your chest, saying, "Oh, you want to get you're fighting against the people who are telling you to stay at home, trying to save your lives. You're upset with those people. In the meantime, there are people who are keeping your cities going, keeping your loved ones alive, and you want to get a haircut? Who the hell do you think you are?"
So there were all those protests that he's talking about there against the shutdowns were peaceful. There was no rioting. There was no looting. There were no fires. And yet he's denouncing them. Who do they think they are? And then there are protests that are violent. Washington, D.C. is burning to the ground. And they're just all peaceful. Donald's a hypocrite. He's a hypocrite. Oh, they just want a haircut. They didn't want a haircut. They wanted to get back with their lives because the economy was being destroyed. You want to talk about dictatorship? What about these Democrat governors who were putting the most draconian laws down for weeks during the coronavirus? And Donald Heyman never complained about dictatorship then. And Trump didn't shut down the company. He didn't want to be a dictator in that time. He wanted people to be able to go back to work. And then Anderson Cooper, who I usually don't criticize that much. I used to kind of respect him. But he reacted to what Trump did. Here it is.
The killing of George Floyd, Eric Garner, the torture of Abner Louima, that's not law and order. The president seems to think that dominating black people, dominating peaceful protesters is law and order. It's not. He calls them thugs. Who is the thug here? Hiding in a bunker? Hiding behind a suit? Who is the thug? People have waited for days for this wannabe wartime president to say something. And this is what he says, and that is what he does. I've seen societies fall apart as a reporter. I've seen people dying in the streets while protesting. I've seen countries ripped apart by hate and misinformation and lies and political demagogues and racism. We can't let that happen here.
So Trump is a thug. Not the people who are literally trying to burn the cities to the ground over the weekend, who were shooting at cops, killing store owners, beating store owners, beating a guy in a truck. And Trump's the thug? And then he says, you want to talk about misinformation and lies. He says Trump just wants to dominate black people. Don Lemon says Trump is declaring war on everyday Americans. Trump never said any of those things. And yet that's how it's interpreted. Who is spreading the misinformation here? We'll continue this conversation in a moment here on Beyond Reason Radio.
If you like Beyond Reason Radio, well, make sure to show it by liking the Facebook page at facebook.com/Beyond Reason Radio. Your safe space for conservative thought, not for political correctness. Yaffee is back right now.
Welcome back to the show. I appreciate y'all listening here on News Radio WFLA Orlando. If you're listening live, we're on Facebook Live as well, like the Beyond Reason Radio Facebook page, and all the listeners of the podcast as well. Now, Tom Benson, I know that you were not a big fan of Trump doing the photo op, walking to the church. You actually had an interesting idea of something Trump could have done.
I thought it was bad optics.
Yeah, well, it seems like it was.
Yeah, it's the way it turned out. I think what he should have done is gotten a representative group of protesters, legit protesters, and invited them into the White House and had a chat. He could still have his photo op there.
Okay, I think that's a good idea. Like I said, I'm not always a fan of what Trump does. I just think the reaction to it is just beyond. I just don't understand how they can be focused on Trump when for the past 5 days we've literally seen our cities under attack. And I don't think I'm exaggerating when I'm saying that. And I'll give examples on why I'm not exaggerating. But first, another Beyond Reason comment here from Chris Cuomo of CNN. I really have to talk about this. Comparing the protesters to the Boston Tea Party? Here it is.
Doesn't make it okay to riot, says the majority. But doesn't it depend why it's happening? A riot in Boston Harbor started the fight that amounted to America. Cities burned across the continent in 1968, again at Stonewall. In each of those cases, it was the minority manifesting a desperate plea to be heard and for change, just like now. A friend of mine, celebrated American and African American, asked me in a broken voice, why doesn't America love us? Why do they do this to us?
It's such a lie that Americans don't love African Americans in 2020. There's no evidence of that. What really makes me sad about all this is we were making a lot of progress. African American unemployment was going down. More African Americans were entering the middle class, the upper middle class. Crime rates in the African American community were plummeting. Downtown, inner cities, we're seeing urban renewals all over the country. And we are now throwing that down the drain for a lie. Why not look at the real evidence? But talking about the Boston Tea Party, so these riots are the same thing as our founders throwing British tea into the ocean because the British government was mandating that they buy British tea and couldn't make tea on their own. That's the same thing as what we're doing now.
Wait a minute. Were they throwing tea into the harbor or were they throwing bricks through windows?
Yeah. Were they mobbing innocent people? Were they burning their own stores?
So I saw a great meme today that basically said, geez, I'm going out for dinner. Should I take a mask with me or a brick?
Yeah, exactly. And you know what? You want to talk about the founding fathers. Let's learn from one founding father, John Adams. So you've probably heard of the Boston Massacre, where some British officers shot and killed some protesters, and they called it the Boston Massacre. John Adams decides, he's asked, and he decides he's going to do it because it's the right thing to do. He decides to defend those British soldiers in a court of law.
That's right.
The reason why he decided to do it is he believed in real justice was that everyone has the right to defend themselves, and each individual has civil rights of innocent until proven guilty. He decides to defend them. It was the mob at the time that wanted to hang them. It was the mob that was like, hang them, they're all murderers, without the real evidence. And then in the court case, the real evidence comes out, and it turns out that they were not murderers, that they were reacting to the mob who was being hostile to the soldiers. And that wouldn't have come out if we just followed the mob at the time. We would have just hung them because they're British soldiers and we don't care. Facts matter. Rights matter. But of course, it doesn't matter to everyone, including one of the authors of the 1619 Project, New York Times, Nicole Hannah-Jones. You want to know why we're in a state where people think it's okay to burn down our cities? I talked about one of the reasons why these protests are happening, but the violent protesters out there, those who are calling destruction of our country, why are they doing it? Where do they get these ideas from? They get it from people like Nicole Hannah-Jones, who said this about it.
I think, one, we need to be really careful with our language. Yes, it is disturbing to see property being destroyed. It is disturbing to see people taking property from stores. But these are things. And violence is when an agent of the state kneels on a man's neck until all of the life is leached out of his body. Destroying property which can be replaced is not violence. And to put those things, to use the exact same language to describe those two things, I think really it's not moral to do that.
She's an idiot.
Of course it's violence. You have private property rights as an individual citizen in America. That's your private property. You have a right to it, and she doesn't care. Oh, it's just things. Well, you want to talk about just things, huh? What about all the people that have been killed by these riots? People have been killed by it. It's not just property. Let's look at the police chief in St. Louis.
Mm.
He reacted because 4 of his officers were shot. It's the St. Louis guy. I don't know if that was the next one I had.
I got it. Mm-hmm.
This police chief is black. So is he part of the systemic racism that everyone's talking about? This police chief is black. Listen to him talk about what went on in his city against cops over the past few days.
And we had to protect our headquarters building. They were throwing fireworks on officers. Fireworks were exploding on officers. They had officers that had gas poured on them, and we're trying to figure out what is going on. How could this be? Mr. Floyd was injured down and was killed somewhere else, and they're tearing up cities all across the country. And what constructive thing is going on? The looting, and we still have trying to get control. We have federal assets helping us. We have St. Louis County. We got the Missouri Highway Patrol. We have the National Guard. We got everybody trying to help us, and all of this because some people just decided to steal and break windows. That's all they're doing. So I don't understand what that has to do with Mr. Floyd's death. That's what I don't understand. But all that was going on tonight was people throwing rocks, throwing explosives on officers, trying to throw gas. Officers exhibited extraordinary restraint, and when they tried to seize upon headquarters, we used some munitions to put people back. But that was after rocks had been thrown at them, after fireworks had been exploded upon them, and so I just don't understand. I don't think anybody understands why this mayhem is going on across the country.
That's Police Chief of St. Louis, John Hayden, who is black. What about the retired St. Louis police captain, David Dorn, who Trump tweeted out about? What about his life? Oh, let's not talk about the violence. Let's try to understand. People are angry. It's like the Boston Tea Party. David Dorn, 77, was killed while responding to an alarm at a pawn shop overnight Monday, St. Louis Police Department announced in a news conference on Tuesday. One of the business had one of our retired Captain David Dorn, who retired after 38 years. During the looting process, David Dorn was exercising law enforcement that he learned here. His son, Brian Powell, commented on this. Do you see it there, Dorn? It's the Dorn cut. Go ahead and play what he said about this.
And I looked at the phone number. It was my brother. And he called me just crying and bawling and like, they shot and killed Dad. They shot and killed Dad. A numbing feeling that came over my body. And I just like, wow. I just couldn't believe I was in total disbelief. He's a forgiving soul. So he would have forgiven that person and tried to talk to him because he's real big on trying to talk to youth and mentor young people as well. So he tried to get them on the straight and narrow and everything. The person that pulled the trigger, my message to them would just simply be just step back from what you're doing. Know the real reason that you're protesting. Let's do it in a positive manner. We don't have to go out and loot and do all the other things.
What about that family? A black family, by the way. David Dorn's black. Was black. Retired police officer. Loved being a cop. What about Patrick Underwood, a security guard who was murdered during a leftist protest? Oh, he's just like the Boston Tea Party, I guess. Don't say I don't have compassion. Don't say, oh, you just don't understand. You don't have compassion. What about compassion for these people? What about a clothing store owner in Ohio says he begged looters not to destroy his store and told them he understood their cause? He moved to the U.S. from Egypt nearly a decade ago, and he has lost everything overnight. A minority immigrant, understanding the cause. They didn't care. You thought it was about the cause? It's about the destruction of our country. I'm going to try to end in a little bit with something that made Yaffee Laffee. I have to talk about one more thing, some misinformation out there, and much more. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. We'll be right back.
Listen to the latest episodes of Beyond Reason. Download the podcast at Spreaker.com. The voice of reason in a world that is beyond reason is back now.
Yes, welcome back to the show, everyone. This is Beyond Reason Radio. I'm your host, Michael Yaffee. Let's get straight into it because there's another trend that I have noticed on social media lately. Some of my trolls have been throwing this out there. They're trying to push forward the narrative that the reason why we have had riots in the cities is because of police activity, that the police are the one fomenting these riots.
So, in other words, if they were just allowed to roam at will and do what they want, there wouldn't be that much of a problem.
Which is
okay.
Or they're just going too far in responding to peaceful protests. Oh. And one of the trends was Seattle. Seattle had this large, and I mean, I've seen videos of some of these protests, thousands of people taunting cops, throwing stuff at them, all kinds of stuff. But there was this trend that Seattle, it was declared a riot by the cops, but there really wasn't a riot, that the cops started it. That the cops just didn't like the protests and started it. Except when you actually hear from the reporter on the ground who was at the front line next to the cops, and this reporter is black, by the way, she, of course, tells a different story. Here's what she said actually happened in Seattle when there was a riot started.
You have a few people who started pushing the barriers here at 11th and Pine, pushing the barriers, and some of the protesters and organizers were saying, don't do that, stop doing that. And then they just kept moving those barriers, and then all of a sudden, my photog and I are standing in the corner. We see it, a bottle flies through the air and goes to the other side where the officers are standing. And that is when chaos erupted. People are shoving and pushing, and then the pepper spray is deployed. It's coming down on the line, and then there's tear gas. People are running around everywhere.
I just wanted to point out that sometimes there's more to the story. They were showing the video of the so-called NYPD officers running over peaceful protesters. They weren't peaceful protesters. They started mobbing the car. And he was trying to get out of there, and another cop drove in to try to move people away from the people trying to mob the NYPD car. The fact is, I think people right now want a reason to be outraged because it aligns with their groupthink. And there's always, I'm not optimistic, unfortunately, about the near future because there's always going to be anecdotal evidence of police brutality because the nature of the job requires force. And unfortunately, sometimes there are going to be those who use and abuse that authority. And even though the statistics show that is not an epidemic systemic problem in this country, you don't need statistics and facts in this world to promote a narrative. All you need is a couple of videos and anecdotal evidence, and people will grab onto it and spread it and find a reason to be outraged. And then other people will grab onto it and post stuff on social media to make themselves feel good. Oh, look how good I am because I'm protesting. Should we end the show? Try to end the show maybe with something that made Yaffee Laffee?
Sounds good to me.
All right. It is that time of the show once again. Something that made Yaffee Laffee.
Well, he can still laugh.
So, here's the headline. It was something I think you were referencing a little bit earlier. This might be a different story. Antifa kid who smashed a police car and incited riots in Pittsburgh is escorted into custody by his mom and dad. Getting exactly what he deserves.
You bet.
Brian Bartels, the 20-year-old man who police say turned a protest into a riot on Saturday in Pittsburgh, turned himself into law enforcement Monday, escorted by his mom and dad. Good for them. He faces charges of institutional vandalism, rioting, and reckless endangerment of another person, according to police. Law enforcement had been investigating the destruction of a police SUV over the weekend that had been spray painted and set on fire during the demonstrations. After receiving an anonymous tip from a co-worker identifying Bartels as the culprit, police executed a search warrant at his home. During the search, they found 2 guns, 6 spray paint cans, gloves, and a sweatshirt that the suspect had been wearing during the protest. Of course, he lives this great life, another young white kid who has no reason to protest, and he's out there doing this.
You got to wonder, I mean, how many of these protesters have jobs they have to go to at 8 o'clock in the morning the next day? Not many, probably.
I know. I guess not. I don't know. But I just love the fact that his parents escorted him in.
Well, good for them. Yeah.
Good for them. I know maybe it's not as much a Laffee as a good for them, but so here's the main thing I want to end the show with today. You know, I could give you all kinds of stats on the nature of police brutality in this country, if police are really racist, what's really going on, but all the other shows are going to do that. There's a great piece in the Wall Street Journal about this. There's a Prager University video talking about this. I just want to say, don't just buy into the groupthink. There is so much pressure out there right now to just follow the crowd when it comes to what's going on. I refuse to just follow the crowd. America is a great country that I love. I love this country for many different reasons. And yes, it has its problems. Yes, it has its flaws. Doesn't mean it's not worth loving. Doesn't mean it's not overall good. I love my family. My family has its flaws, but I still love them despite the flaws. But if we focus just completely on the negative and buy into the narrative that this country is just racist and evil from the core, you will continue to see stuff like this. And it's only going to get worse. Don't buy into it. It's a lie. It's a lie. Appreciate you listening to the show. I will be back tomorrow at the same time, so I'll check you guys in.